both Frisco natives, and I'm saying Frisco natives. Or for all the people who don't like Frisco, I'll say San Francisco natives or city natives. We get into it on Twitter, for the last 5 years.
Yeah.
San Fran, Frisco. And Herb Caen, the legendary writer for the San Francisco Chronicle, what was the name of his book where he basically told everybody you can't call it Frisco?
Yeah, it was called Don't Call It Frisco, written in 1953. And, you know, what's funny to me, Bonta, is if we look back at the origin of the word, right? Originally, San Francisco was named Yerba Buena by the Indians, the natives that lived in this particular area. And over the course of time, for whatever reason, because Herb Caen wrote a book called Don't Call It Frisco in 1953, that was cemented in as his legacy. When in reality, if you do a deep dive, Herb Caen went back and forth on whether you could call it Frisco or not. I mean, before then, he was referencing it as that Frisco in earlier writings. And then after that, in 1981, 1992, like he said it over and over. You know what? It's not that big of a deal. I wrote it in a book and it took on cultural impact. Here's the funny thing to me. The first time we see the word Frisco being utilized throughout the country, the St. Louis San Francisco Pacific Railway had a train stop called the Frisco Express. And so that's how the name first came about. And you know, you and I'm a fifth generation native. I grew up in the Excelsior, right on the streets of London. You know, as a young little man, you know, we're from the 80s, right? We grew up in the 80s and the 90s. And I think that when you talk to different people like my dad's age or my grandfather's age, now, again, these people deep-seated San Francisco natives, the way I've always learned is, hey, it's a cultural neighborhood by neighborhood situation, okay? You talk to my dad, he's going to say, no way, you can't call it Frisco. But in our era, the culture that we grew up in, with Hell's Angels adopting that term Frisco, the Frisco choppers that you'd see all throughout the Excelsior, and then the pop culture of hip hop. I think this is massive. Rappin' Forte, Equipto, JT the Bigger Figure, IMP, RBL Posse. Thank you. All of these people coming out with Frisco as a slang, it became acceptable. And then you saw all the t-shirt shops and everybody bring in that word. So guys of our age, when we played ball with kids all around the city. Everybody about our age, whether you're from the Sunset, the Richmond, the Excelsior, Bayview, the Mission, we all said Frisco. But my dad's age, it's a no-no for them. And if you take it back a generation farther, Pink Floyd, I mean, he had the Darkness Over Frisco album. And then you had Otis Redding coming out with Sitting on the Dock of the Bay, the Frisco Bay. You know, so all of these different cultural pop icons, man, they all referenced it. So again, I think that depending on the neighborhoods you grew up in, you know, if you grew up in the Sunset and you're in your 40s or 50s, you're probably not going to be akin to saying Frisco. But I'll tell you this right now, guys our age, it is universally endorsed and accepted. You could call it the city. You could call it Sucker Free. You could call it SF. You could call it the Golden Gate. Frisco. But the SCO is a great. The 415, but the one thing you cannot call it, do not call it San Fran.
You cannot do it. You cannot do that. And I don't know where San Fran came from. Outside of San Francisco, believe, you just take, San Fran, that's okay. San Fran this, San Fran that. I don't know when San Fran became popular amongst people, not only in the city, but people who come from out of town. And it drives me freaking crazy when I hear San Fran, because it's code for you're not really from here. You don't really know about our culture. And the thing about Frisco is, you talk about the 90s, right? You talk about the early 90s and the late 80s with all the rappers and, you know, even Dr. Dre, Frisco, Let's Go on California Love with Tupac. The late 90s, they were selling Frisco hoodies. I had multiple Frisco hoodies, blue, black with red writing there, Frisco. So it was acceptable. I don't know when San Fran became a thing. I really don't. But for some reason, people love to argue with city natives like ourselves. People who are from the city, who grew up, were born and raised, never left, went to high school here, middle school, all that stuff. For some reason, they say, you know what? San Fran is cool. We've been calling it that our whole lives. Nobody at George Washington High School ever called San Francisco San Fran. Nobody at Reardon ever called it San Fran. People who call it San Fran are not from here. And that's basically code for me, where it's just like, okay, you're calling it San Fran. You really didn't grow up here. And then they'll tell you, well, I was actually born at a hospital. I was actually born at Kaiser. But where'd you grow up? Oh, I grew up in Millbrae. I grew up in San Bruno. I grew up in Redwood City. You're not from here then. You didn't take community buses to school. You know what I'm saying? So it's infuriating that people try to tell us what you can call it. But we both agree, and I think people who grew up here in the city, Butcher Boy, you can't call it San Fran. Nobody's ever called it San Fran here.
No, you can't call it San Fran. And one last thing on the Frisco, like what goes back to the music and why is the music so important? Because these were people who grew up in the neighborhoods that we grew up in. And so they were putting our neighborhoods on the map, whether it is Equipto, whether it is IMP, whether it be RBL or people from the Mo, whether it's the GLP or the Get Low Players, any of those guys, San Quinn, exactly. And, I go back to creative music on Mission and Ocean. We used to actually have to thumb through all the little CDs and the different albums out there, and everything was Frisco related. Guys were rocking their Giants gear, their 49er gear, 11-5, like you name it. All the different artists, they represented a movement of our culture from our neighborhoods. And so we felt more attached to those. Don't try to tell me what I can call my childhood, okay?
Right.
This is part of our childhood. And I understand, like I said, the older group, they didn't have that. If you're over 45, you're a white dude from the lower Sunset, you probably don't feel Frisco at all. But guys on my side of the city, I know from your side of the city, our age bracket, they totally embrace it. The one thing you can never do is call it San Fran. No, it is an absolute no-no.
And here's the thing, Butcher Boy. Have you ever seen somebody in the city rock a San Fran hoodie or a San Fran hat? You've never seen anybody trying to sell San Fran gear. And I'm glad you brought up the record shops. There was one on Hayes, and right there on Hayes and Masonic, small little record shop where we go in and get our tapes. And you're right, guys like Shasky and Lakeview, you know what I'm saying, rocking all the Frisco gear. I've never, ever heard a city native call it San Fran, nor have I ever heard a city native say, you know what? It's okay. San Fran is okay. The one thing that really makes my blood boil when it comes to this debate is when people who are not from here try to tell you what's acceptable. That's what bothers me, because it's like, wait a minute. I grew up here, dog. Where'd you grow up? San Rafael. I was in Mill Valley. Like, how do you know? How do you know? It's one thing to have the taste, but it's one thing to live the everyday city life. Mm-hmm. When you live the everyday city life, by catching muni buses, by hanging on the back of the trains or the back of the wires on those muni buses, or walking from, say, all the way from the marina to Fillmore and Hayes, Fillmore and Hayes and all that stuff. You can't tell us what to call it. So the whole San Fran thing, it's really a stupid debate, but it's one that gets under my skin because it's people who are not from here who tell you what you can call it, and people who are from here will never, ever call it San Fran, nor will they ever rock gear that says San Fran on it. It's really ridiculous, to be honest with you.
So I think that we're both in unison here. You could call it Frisco all you want if you're
Frisco.
From here. Never could call it San Fran. One last thing. You could always spot somebody who truly ain't from the city. You could, when you ask them, hey, man, where'd you grow up? What city, what school did you go to? And they instantly go to college or something like that. You're like, whoa. I'm talking about grammar school or high school, bro.
Right.
What are you talking about? Right. Because I'm about to play the 3 Degrees of Kevin Bacon story here, because I'm going to start to drop some of the people that I know that I'm sure you know, and we're going to have mutual friends. And if we stand here long enough at Geneva and Mission swapping stories, I'm sure we got a cousin or two that are related to each other. That's the way the city is. It's super intertwined. I think the music, the culture, the eras, the neighborhoods, they all kind of bleed into each other. And so guys of our age, it's not just Frisco. It's a badge of honor to be born and raised here, to be a survivor, a grinder, and to stay here, because it's hard as hell financially to make it work for people. And so when I hear out-of-towners trying to tell me what I can and can't call my city, I take offense to that, B.
It gets personal. If you see our Twitter feed, because now whenever somebody says San Fran, I'm sure you get tagged in a tweet. I get tagged in a tweet, and I'm just like, you know what? Every single day I have to walk away from it, because the text line here at 95.7 The Game, right? The text line will blow up with this Frisco San Fran debate. And to tell you, you'll see numbers from the 925 to 510 saying, oh, it's okay to call it San Fran. No. Your area code, first of all, is not from the 415. You're from the 510. It's from the 925. And then another test real quick, Butch, it's just the muni lines. What bus did you catch to go to school?
The 29.
The 22. You knew you said the 29. I said the 29 Sunset. I said the 22. You said the 22 Fillmore. The 24. The 24 Divisadero. We knew all the M, the K, the L, the 54 Excelsior, the 29 Sunset. We knew all that stuff. The 15 3rd Street, which is now the T train. You knew when a guy wasn't from the city, when they couldn't name you a muni line, man. So that is dead. Don't ever call it San Fran. If you do, don't do it towards me or in my vicinity or Shasky's vicinity. Do not do that.
Subscribe from that tag, homie.
Yes.
415 Frisco, SF, City by the Bay, the Golden Gate City, Yerba Buena, all acceptable. San Fran, hell no.
Hell no. You call it the Skull if you want to. Call it the Skull. But don't ever call it San Fran.